The largest collection of Darwin's correspondence in the world is here in the archives of Cambridge University Library. And because it contains letters to Darwin as well as from Darwin, and letters to and from family members, it's a fantastic resource for historians because it allows us to hear the voices of people who would otherwise be lost to history, especially women. About 5% of Darwin's correspondents were women, and these include friends, family and fellow scientists. Many people are surprised to hear that Victorian women were working in science, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to put together this book. Firstly, we wanted to highlight the voices of Victorian women who were working in science and corresponding with Darwin, and we also wanted to look at the lives of other women, not necessarily scientists, who were part of Darwin's life. Darwin said in one of his publications, Descent of Man, that he thought women had evolved to be less intelligent than men, and that they wouldn't become any more intelligent until they were breadwinners. Now, in fact, Darwin knew plenty of female breadwinners, and one of the most interesting was Mary Treat, an American botanist and entomologist from New Jersey. Mary Treat earned her own living by writing on science for popular magazines and collecting specimens for other scientists, including Asa Gray at Harvard, Charles Valentine Riley, who worked for the US government, and Joseph Hooker at Kew. She first wrote to Darwin to explain that she'd found a way to control the sex of a particular butterfly, and she kept these at home. And she found some caterpillars left their food in order to pupate earlier than others. These were always male butterflies, but if she encouraged them to feed for longer, they turned into female butterflies. On the other hand, if she stopped a caterpillar from eating early, they always turned into male butterflies. Treat also helped Darwin in his work on insectivorous plants. Darwin was interested in the water plant Utricularia, or bladderwort. Bladderwort has tiny bladders underneath the water surface, and they often have insects trapped inside. But Darwin was puzzled about how they got in there. He thought that maybe they forced their way in using their heads as wedges. But Treat found the right answer, and she published it in Harper's Magazine. She discovered that the mouth of the bladder was sensitive and opened when an insect brushed against it, and the resulting partial vacuum sucked the insect inside. Treat also wrote to Darwin about a new species of water lily that she had found in Florida.
My greatest find has been a new water lily. It is really astonishing how it could have escaped the botanists. There are acres of it in extent, growing in the bays and coves of the St. John's River. It is one of the most beautiful plants I ever beheld, and when I first saw it, my heart fairly stood still.
Now, it turned out that this had actually appeared in Audubon's Birds of America, but everybody thought it was just a pretty background for the swan. Until Treat looked at it, they didn't realise it was an entirely new species.
My name is Paul White. I'm part of the editorial team on the Darwin Letters, and I worked on the chapter on Darwin and religion. When we think about religion and its relationship to Darwinism, we often think about big public controversies between evolutionists and creationists, or in Darwin's day, we have the famous Oxford debate between Bishop Samuel Wilberforce and Thomas Huxley, in which the two men square off in a controversial manner. These big public debates are often very polarized, and the views they present are antagonistic. If we look at letters, however, we find a very different picture emerging, one that's much more thoughtful and reflective. And letters are a very important medium for women to engage with Darwin, women who were, for the most part, excluded from public debates. And one of the most interesting and searching letters that we have about religion is from Mary Everest Boole. Mary Boole was an accomplished mathematician. She had married George Boole, a logician, in 1855, and it assisted him with his work. And by the time she writes to Darwin in 1866, she has become a widow. She's trying to raise 5 daughters on her own. She moves to London and gets a job as a librarian at Queen's College, and this is the first women's college in Britain. And there she continues to teach informally. She teaches women and children mathematics, and she leads a series of conversations about topics like religion and its relationship to philosophy and psychology and ethics. She later writes a series of educational books in which she presents various ideas about how to teach mathematics to children using practical exercises, familiar objects, and one of the methods she develops is called curved stitching, which is based on sewing cards, which were quite popular in the period, and she devised some that had geometrical shapes, so she could introduce complex ideas about mathematical curves and tangents through these familiar objects. In her letter to Darwin, she raises questions about the implications of his theory for religious belief, the power of moral choice, and goodness of God. And these questions arose directly from her role as a mother and an educator. This is her letter, and it begins very formally because she's a stranger to Darwin. She says, "Dear Sir, will you excuse my venturing to ask you a question to which no one's answer but your own would be quite satisfactory to me." And she goes on to ask these various questions, and then she concludes by saying, "My own impression has always been that you had supplied one of the missing links between the facts of science and the promises of religion. Science must take her path and theology hers. And you are not responsible if the meeting point should still be very far off." These are just a couple of the many women featured in Darwin and Women. Chapters cover friends, marriage, children, various sciences, writers, critics, and servants. The closing chapter discusses women who challenged Darwin's views on women and the place of women in society directly. The variety and extent of his correspondence with women, I think, will come as a surprise to many readers. And even for those of us who work every day on these letters, gathering all of this material into one volume really made it much more powerful, and it produced some real revelations.